Guys, welcome back to another episode of the Hart Hustle Podcast. I am super excited to bring my newest guest to you today for a couple reasons. One, me and this individual have been able to create a friendship that I am very proud of. You know, he is also aligned with so many things that I think about on a daily basis when it comes to mindset, entrepreneurship, stress management, but also just this curious mindset to talk about topics that a lot of people aren't talking about. Today, I've got entrepreneur and stress management coach, Freeman Beals. Freeman, welcome to the show, man. Thanks for coming.
And thank you so much, Keenan, A, for that stellar introduction, and B, for having me here. It really is an honor every time I get to sit down and chat with you. It's like I get this chance to just expand kind of, I think, both the way that we think, but also anybody listening as well. So I get super jacked for these. Super excited.
You know, I love that. I'm very much jacked to give everybody the opportunity to learn more about you. You know, people see the forward-facing positive guy who is now going above and beyond the 365 Days of Positivity initiative. So congratulations for continuing to push into new landscapes with that. But more importantly, we always see you talk about stress management, right? We talk about you kind of adopting to a mindset that helps you be successful. And that's where so many people who tune into this show really are going to get benefit from you. But before we kind of dive into those topics that you are an absolute expert at, why don't you give everybody an understanding of where Freeman came from? Where are you calling in from today? And give us a little rundown on kind of, you know, what inspired you to be the amazing person who you are today.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I'll start at the top of that. I coming from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. For those of you up here in the Great White North, I understand your pains with our winter, and I'm glad it's almost over. And I was like, why do I not live in Florida or somewhere warmer? As I've gotten older, I've realized that maybe winters aren't my jam. That's where I'm calling in for. As for where does Freeman come to? What does my background look like? It's an interesting thing that I've been thinking a lot on recently, actually. So then I'm glad you asked that question, because I think for a lot of people, and especially for myself in the self-development space, we feel like we need to maybe have this super dark, horrible background. You know what I mean? And I don't necessarily have that. Sure, did I have struggles growing up? 100%. Like, there is no doubt about that. But I've been thinking a lot about like what has led me to where I am. And it's still something that I'm kind of processing through myself. I know the reason I am doing what I do now is because when I look back at my life, and I kind of follow the common threads, things like positivity and stress management have always been part of my life. So I was thinking about that just the other day, and I was like, why do I do what I do? Why am I here doing this? And I was looking kind of back at stuff, and I'm like, I have lived through a lot of what other people would call stressful or challenging things, and people with me doing those things have responded in certain ways that I didn't respond in. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, there's nothing overly special about me, so to speak. So why have I reacted the way I have? And what makes me resilient in these ways? Diving deep into that has helped me understand a lot more about myself, a lot more about the issues that are around stress, how to cultivate positivity, and also then how to bring that now forward from my life into other people's lives.
Yeah, let's talk about that choice a little bit. And thank you for kind of taking a little bit of a deeper dive. I want to talk about some of those stressful moments that we had early in life. Because what you talked about there was the choice that we have when we come into, you know, times of hardship or seasons of, you know, tough times. So when you talk about you didn't react the same way as everybody else, what does that mean?
So there's a few things in my life. So I'll go way back first. Let's go way back in the time machine here to like 5-6-year-old me. When I was quite young, my parents up and left big city to move to small rural town. And we lived in, and I'm not kidding here, in a tent, 2 big army canvas tents for 12 months of our lives. Throughout the winter, we had Christmas in them and everything. And I have a younger sister now, but she wasn't around then. I have an older sister, and our memories of that time are very different. Yeah. I still remember like, you know, waking up at like Christmas morning, and I remember my mom having this wild idea to like hang all the Christmas balls off the roof of the tent, which sounded great until like the squirrels were jumping on there, and then they were all coming down. But like, I have all these really interesting and, in my opinion, vivid and powerful memories of that, whereas my sister doesn't necessarily have those. And that was kind of a common theme throughout our lives growing up, is she just reacted to things differently. So that's at a childhood level, that was definitely there.
Was
And as I
was
grew
she your
up,
older sister in that situation? Is that what we're talking about?
yeah, older sister.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when we talk about the age difference between you guys, what does that mean? Like how older was
So
she?
she's 3 years older than me.
Okay.
Yeah. And my younger sister is 15 or 16 years younger than me. 14.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Not great at math. But yeah, so that was interesting. And then I grew up in, I mean, what you could call stressful. I grew up in a family business, family whitewater rafting company. So there obviously lots of stresses involved in that. But aside from that, working in oil and gas for a number of years as a foreman, looking after people, looking after jobs, dealing with millions of dollars of product and stock and things like that. And I could see the people around me who are like smoking and, they've got chewing and they're drinking a lot and they're complaining about their wives and their families. And I'm like, this is not a good way to live and not the way that I want to live. And so I would work hard to like cultivate a level of positivity and happiness around those things. And I could see it ripple out to the rest of the organization as well. So that's kind of where all that all started, about like, okay, why do I do these things the way I do them? And how can I help others do them in that way?
Yeah, it's a very interesting experience because, I would consider myself a very positive person as well. And you and I connected on LinkedIn originally because of our positivity efforts. And I thought that was so cool. But, the more that I learn about myself, I kind of do have that opportunity to be a little bit more introspective, self-reflective on why I'm so positive. And at some point in time, very much like you, I think I kind of realized that this is the path that I want to go down. Because I'm very observant, right? One of the things that really gets underneath my skin is when I see people complaining about situations. And I think maybe in today's society, people complain because it's a shared experience that we can do with other people, right? They always say like misery loves company. And I feel like when you get into a group setting, when people start complaining, it's very easy for other people to start complaining about stuff. And that almost becomes like a cultural narrative and the thing that we participate in, right? And so that's 100%. What kind of reminded me when I heard you said, I listen to people complain about their wives, they're smoking, they're drinking, they're doing all this kind of stuff, and it starts to fester and almost become like a shared activity.
Yeah, and it is weird, this need that we have. It's got to do with the need that we have to like feel like we're fitting in. So if we're surrounded by that level of negativity, then we're going to be drawn to kind of feed into that, right? So we feel like we're part of it. It's our tribal instinct kicking in. And it's hard to push against that when it's all around you. But it is really neat what happens when you kind of flip the switch on it and start impacting others in a way that you can see their mentality start to change. Because nobody wants to wake up and feel like crap and feel negative. Like, we don't, as human beings, that's not what we're looking for in life. So when somebody opens the door a little bit and says, hey, wait a minute, like, what if we look at it like this? What if we just flip the script a little bit on this? It's wild to see what happens with people's mentalities.
Yeah. And I think that's such a needed shift for so many people. You know what I mean? But like you and I have talked about this privately as well. It almost seems like because everybody is so used to doing the easy things and complaining and sharing in that experience, that sometimes getting people to shift gears is a challenge. And sometimes it's looked at from an effort perspective. I know when I'm talking about this myself, I think about putting things out about positivity on social media, right? And telling people to look at things differently. Often those posts don't get the type of engagement and type of reaction that the negative complaining posts do. So why do you think that kind of is in our society, and especially on social media?
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate because our brains are wired to negative. So, I mean, and I'll dive into that a little bit, but essentially we are tuned to look for negative things in our environment, seek them out. It's a survival instinct in our brains. Our brains are trying to keep us safe. By identifying a negative situation, our brains are saying, cool, I know that negative thing's over there. I've recognized it. And now I know I need to avoid it. That was sort of where that came from. Now, obviously, our society has changed into being this social media landscape in this online world. But that core tool of our brain still happens. And that's why, like, to go back into thinking about, why are we positive and why are we the way that we are? It's a sort of like is an act that you have to do. You have to be aware of it. You have to put work into it. And I think that's part of what people see is they're like, oh, that person's just positive. And I was like, I'm not just a positive individual. Like there's back end work that goes into being the way that I am, but it's easier for us to fall into the negative and complain and kind of just follow along that path.
Yeah, I mean, my positivity, and I like to share this story every once in a while, is so when I first started on my entrepreneurial journey, right, started in 2014. By 2016, 2017, I had been a couple years in the game, and it was still very much rough going for me and the team, right? Because we had started a telehealth company back in the day, no one really believed that telehealth was going to be a thing. And so I was sitting by myself at my house one day, and I think we had just lost a deal, or somebody was like, no, we're not interested. Video is not going to be a thing in our patient experience. People don't want that. And I was like, why does this not make sense to people? Like, it's as clear as day to me. And in that moment, I kind of started to reflect on my life, and I decided that there's a couple things that I can control. One of which is my mindset and how I show up every single day. So let me do this crazy experiment. January 1st of 2017, I started hopping on social media and posting a positive video for myself on my Instagram story, right? And I did that day after day after day after day. I was like, it's day 17, it's day 49, it's day 68, it's 114, whatever. And before I knew it, my brain started to change because I'd wake up and intentionally kind of put that action in every single day. And before I know it, I started to subconsciously look for the positive side of maybe dealing or getting dealt like a bad deck or a bad hand in the card game of business. And that will always just be so profound for me because I don't know where I'd be at today if I didn't take that conscious effort to try and program my brain to be as positive as possible. That hardwiring process was so necessary that it's helped me kind of get to where I'm at today, which has been a big game changer for me. But it wasn't easy, like your point.
No, it's not easy. And I'm so glad you called it like programming and hardwiring, because people think it's just like you decide one day, like, I'm going to notice more positive things in life. And it's like, you're not. Like, that's not how it works. And I'm sorry for anybody who thinks it is that way, but it takes kind of putting that work in, like you said you did. You just said you started doing it. And what happens in our brains is this concept called neuroplasticity, right? So you may have heard this term, the neurons that wire together, fire together, or fire together, wire together, sorry. And that's like 100% true. And so what happens is when you're constantly telling your brain, hey, I want to remember positive things. I want to write them down. I want to make videos about them. Whatever medium you're choosing to use them in, you're actually using that part of your neural pathway in your brain, and you're using it more often. What's going to happen is it's going to become more efficient. And I'm not going to pretend to be a neuroscientist and understand the entire things that's going on, but there's neat things with gray matter and stuff like that, and makes it more conductive. But that's what happens. And that's why it's like it has to be a conscious act. And it's really interesting because at the end there, you're like, it doesn't get, it's important because it doesn't necessarily get easier as well. Like, it gets easier to do, but it becomes always as important as it was when you first started. And a good example of this was literally yesterday. I was laying in bed and I could not fall asleep, which is super rare for me. Like, I'm usually pretty good at, like, I sit down at night, I write my journal out, I get in bed, and I'm like 5 minutes and I'm out. I usually do some like light meditating. My brain was like, it was not settling in yesterday. So, and I remember sitting down with my journal, and I was sitting there and I was like, what are my 3 positive things today? And I really had to think about it. So, like, when I look back at yesterday, like, yesterday was, I'll say it, like, yesterday was kind of a shit day. Okay. Yesterday was tough. There wasn't a lot of good that happened in yesterday, but there was bits. And I know that if I wasn't in the habit of looking for those bits of positive and at least like literally writing them down every night, that I would have gone to bed last night like in a miserable state. Did I go to bed in a super happy state last night? No. I was certainly still stressed a little bit, but it would have been far worse if I hadn't have built that habit and, trained that neural pathway in my brain to look for those types of things.
I mean, so while you were talking there, I just want to be, exact about what I was talking about. So I looked up, there's a terminology, the reticular activating system in our brain, right? And if everybody doesn't know what this is this is your brain's ability to start looking for things in your environment when there's a tension on that subject. Great example. You're thinking about buying a new car, right? You go to the dealership and you see a brand new Subaru WRX. It's beautiful, right? Silver, perfect wheels, 6-speed transmission for everybody who can drive a stick out there. And the next thing you know, when you're driving around in traffic, you start seeing WRXs everywhere because your brain is used to and or looking for that specific image and or that subject around you. And it's amazing what our brains can start doing when we start programming them and start kind of targeting them towards the things that we're looking for. And so I like how Gary Vee also talks about this in some of his recent content. He mentions, if you think the world is bad and you want to look for negativity, go hop on social media. You know what I mean? Go look at the news. You're going to find the world that you're looking for. But if you're looking for a positive world, you can also find those things out there as well. But you do have to train your brain in order to look for the good stuff, because the bad stuff is always going to be in abundance around you. And it's easy for your brain to pick up on those things because everybody's calling attention to it. You know what I'm saying? And so, like you said, building that habit through time is a tough practice, but it is so valuable, because the language that we use when we talk about ourselves, talk about our situation, does have the ability to impact our reality. You know, I'm not talking about like we have the ability to manifest the world around us, but if you're consistently talking about negative things like, I'm bad at this, I'm not going to be a proficient, I'll never be the leader I want to be, I'm never going to be the partner I want to be, it's very easy for your brain to start seeing all the reasons why that is true. And I just think people need to really pay attention to kind of the language we use both externally and internally as well, because it does have the ability to shape your world, and it's so important. That stuff is real.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you figured out what it's actually called. Because I wasn't aware that it had a term, and I love that it has a term. So that's super interesting. And the other thing that like you said in there was like, oh, that we manifest our reality. We don't really, manifest our reality, but what we do is we do become aware in our sphere of what we get to call reality, of what's happening. And the reason that for that is our brain's only taking so much information every day. You've probably heard the concept that if we had to decide upon everything that we did, like we wouldn't make it out the door by lunch. We'd be so tired. So our brains are constantly filtering our reality. They have to, in order to sheerly take in what's going on around us. When you choose to think a certain way, you decide what that filter lets in all of a sudden. So it's not that there aren't negative things happening or there aren't stressors in your life, but you've chosen through your thoughts what to filter out and what to pay attention to. And your brain likes that because it likes to be in control. So you're like, hey, I want to look for this type of car, and your brain's going to start picking it out, because then it feels like, yeah, I'm validating the thoughts that are happening in my brain right now. And unfortunately, that works both in the negative and in the positive. So you got to make that conscious effort to put that positive filter on it so that your brain starts looking for those.
And I love that you're calling attention to that, because it is a conscious effort, right? If you're not going to try and do it, you know, you have to be able to reverse engineer success. And I love when you were talking about manifesting there, I heard somebody one time come up with an analogy that I thought was very interesting. They're like, imagine yourself static and the world in itself comes to you. So when we talk about manifesting, we're talking about bringing things to you. And when you're trying to manifest stuff, it really starts with that conscious effort of making decisions that align with where you're going. And I like to think of myself just like kind of sitting on like an orb. And the more I start walking one direction, the orb rotates, or the other direction, it rotates that way. And so when we're talking about manifesting things, being conscious of what we think about, looking for the positive stuff or the negative stuff or whatever subject you're talking about, you start moving the orb underneath you in the direction that you want to go. And eventually that reality is going to turn the horizon and be in front of you. And so really thinking about how you can consciously kind of direct your life, super important. And I think everybody needs to kind of maybe experiment a little bit and practice those things to be able to see if it actually does work or not for you. There's so much science and so much data that talks about, you know, all of the ability to kind of speak our reality into existence. I always love the conversations when I see on social media, there's like people walk up and be like, how did you become so wealthy? And they're like, dude, I mean, like, this is going to sound foo-foo, but it's all about really kind of thinking positive and bringing that world into existence around you. And I think just like the saying, you know, money doesn't bring happiness. Everybody always says, like, I'll figure it out for myself. I think unless you are willing to figure it out for yourself, you're never going to know. And I think that's one of the great justices people can do is by giving themselves the opportunity to actually see if this stuff that we're talking about today works, because I think you and I are living examples of it does. And there are people who are practicing out here, and that's why it's so important.
Yeah, it's funny too, because people tend to, those social media posts that you're talking about, a lot of the answers that people say are like just blatantly simple, right? They're like, oh, how'd you get rich? And they're like, well, I looked at what I was earning and I looked at what I was spending, and I made sure that what I earning was more than what I was spending. And people are like, what? That's all you did? And they're like, yeah, like we overcomplicate things, right? We're like, oh man, it must be so hard to be rich or to be positive. Like I'm going to overthink this to the point of not doing. And unfortunately the case is, it's usually the easiest, simplest steps repeated over and over that lead to those like far reaching goals that seem unrealistic. Like, don't overcomplicate things. Just make the thing easy and then do it over and over again until the result happens.
Like, it's simple, stupid. You know what I mean? Like, all you got to do is just do the same stuff over and over again. You'll get that result. I think that's incredible. Just the simple stuff, the reminders are incredibly important. So, Freeman, what I want to do is I want to pivot the conversation. And I want to kind of hear about your childhood entrepreneurial experience. So we talk about the family whitewater rafting company. Tell us a little bit about that, because I think not a lot of people have had that lived experience. What is it like owning and operating a whitewater rafting company?
Man, it's something. It's two things. That job and profession itself, obviously very high intensive, very go 14-hour days, 7 days a week. Like, what are holidays? What are weekends? Like, that's when you're the busiest, right? And then you layer that with working in a family company, and anybody who's worked in a family company will know that it's above and beyond working anywhere else.
Yes.
Like, you take that dynamic and it just makes things harder. It also makes things feel more, I don't know what the word I want here is, but just deep. Like when you succeed and when you fail with a family, those valleys and those mountaintops are significantly higher and significantly lower. Like, there's no doubt about it.
That's an amazing way to put it. I mean, I also am in a family business, and I feel the same way. Like, when we win, we're winning. But when we lose, we're losing. And it's just like, it's tough for people who haven't experienced the family business dynamic. It's like, when you're trying to also operate a business, there are some moments of tension that are very frustrating. And I just like painted a picture of myself. I could imagine like a young Freeman, like being told like, Freeman, go fill up or go like blow up the rafts. And you're like, Dad, I don't want to. Mom, I don't want to. You do this. You know what I mean? I just think about some of those internal family struggles would be kind of hilarious looking at them now,
Oh, then there was tons, right? And I mean, I spent every summer, the company was formed in 99. I was 7 years old. It's still operating today, and my summers that was every summer I had was doing that. I mean, I started working at like, I don't know, 12 probably. I was, washing wetsuits, and I was working for, I don't know, 25 cents an hour or something crazy. Like, I was taught to work hard, but with that came an amazing work ethic that I can look back on and be super proud of. It's part of the reason I can still work 12 hours a day when I need to. I'm not saying you should, but when I need to, I do. And that's part of it, is that way that I was growing up. And was it tough? Hell yeah. Like, there's no doubt about it that I probably worked harder than I needed to, made less money than I needed to. I mean, I was at the age of 21 or maybe even slightly younger. I was, being a trip leader, which means that I'm not only responsible for my boat, but the entire operation of that day. I got to make sure that me and the 7 boats on the river with me are where they're supposed to be, when they're supposed to be, on the time they're supposed to be, and all 70 clients involved are where they're supposed to be and going where they're supposed to be. And
wow.
And it wasn't a simple operation. I mean, we're talking at this point in time, we've kind of trimmed things down and simplified things, but there was a point where we were running 3 different trips each day on 3 different rivers, which means that there could be anywhere between 3 to 8 trips. Usually we didn't have 3 on each river every day, but you could have anywhere between 6 to 8 trips per day, which means you've got multiple vehicles, multiple different guides, boats, things, and all of that stuff has to work. And there's time limits on things, right? You've only got so many hours in the day, and people have paid, so everything's got to work smoothly. So even the operational mesh that had to happen to make that happen in a professional looking setting was intense. And we would have literally, and I'm not exaggerating this by any means, 2 pages of hour to hour things. Here's what's happening on that hour. Here's where this, like, you know what I mean? And as like essentially as an operation manager, which is what I became eventually, it was my job to make sure that continued to happen. And again, a lot of hours, a lot of stress, a lot going on, but it's what shaped me to be able to do what I do now.
Right. And that was kind of where I was going to take the conversation next. It's like, especially in a family business, right? Now, I would say that you guys at a certain point in time became experts at what you were doing, but what were some of those growing pains from an operational perspective that you experienced from Freeman's perspective, from a company perspective? Like, walk us through some of those early days. I love this.
Man, there was a lot. I mean, when we started operating, it was, and I'm not, again, I sound like I'm making this up, but I'm not. We operated out of those 2 tents that we lived in our first year. There was lots of mistakes. Now, I was quite young, so I don't remember a lot of these, but I remember hearing the stories that my parents would tell. And we had our first trips booked before we even had the boats on site.
Classic.
So the boat showed up, I believe, the day of that first trip, when the first guide that we hired, who's now my stepdad, he showed up that day as well. The boats and the guide showed up the day of the first trip. So like, it's talk about putting the cart before the horse. That's just the way that my mom lived back then. And she's changed since then. We're a bit more controlled than that. But that was certainly like some of the first stumbling steps, right? I think as entrepreneurs you make, you're going to have them. Just for anybody who's on that journey listening, just get used to it, make them, learn from them. It's easier if you do it that way. So that was when we were quite early. And then we were always changing and adapting, always adjusting things. We used to do this ridiculous thing. To get to the river, we had to carry all our boats down. And it's about 500 meters kind of down, right? So 900 feet roughly, down a hill to the river to get all our stuff in. And we used to do that. And then we tried to set up this other system that would like slide the boats down this wooden embankment, but that would ruin the boat. So that was another mistake that we made. So there was a lot of obviously things that we made like that. I think the biggest thing is what happened was we expanded our operations out and out and continued finding new ways to kind of help our consumers, right? And giving them more options. And all that added to us was just layers and layers of things that could go wrong. And it wasn't until we've been doing that for a few years that we went, hold on a second, like this is crazy. Like let's trim this down. Let's make this more streamlined. Let's make our lives easier so that we can make a few products significantly better than versus having a bunch of products that are on a mediocre level.
So who leads some of those conversations? Like when it's time to optimize the business, and I love the entrepreneurial kind of conversation, like when is it a moment of realization that like we can do less, but we can do it better? And at the end of the day, we're going to create more value for our customer or consumer as well. How did that kind of stuff get identified? What was that like?
I mean, a lot of it is, again, the hard way, right? You notice that your staff are working too much. We've got, a few years where we had unhappy staff year after year. And we're like, what? So really, I think what the big changes started to look like was and so me and I think even my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, was involved in these conversations. And then my parents would sit down and have these conversations in our living room, right? And I can remember these very well, where it's like, what happened to the company in the first 10 years? It was this like tight-knit family. That's what people used to call it, right? What happened to that type of organization? And why do we no longer have that? And why is it not coming across? And things, even on the customer side were changing. You could see the reviews weren't quite as good. We weren't getting those super stellar reviews anymore. We weren't getting bad ones, but they weren't kind of at that same level of, authenticity, and the genuineness wasn't coming through in the reviews. It was like, oh yeah, 4 stars, had a great time with my family, right? It wasn't like, oh, our guide Freeman was great and we've added him on Facebook and we had him for dinner, and we weren't getting any of those anymore. So it was time to step back and go, hold on. We were doing this one way and now we're not getting that same response. What has changed in our operation, and how can we begin to bring the life back to where it was before? And that's where those changes started.
And did it feel less like gratifying? Did it feel less fulfilling when you were doing that work? And it was like, this kind of is starting to feel a little bit more transactional from a business perspective, rather than like this jovial, communal family experience that you had before?
Yeah, 100%. I think that was definitely part of it, is you begin to kind of run through a conveyor belt, right? People are just kind of moving through the system instead of being part of it. And that was a big change for us. How do we get people to be back part of that experience again, which is a challenge. I mean, we moved away from it not because we were trying to streamline the business necessarily, but weirdly enough, it was because we were trying to make things safer and make things, more professional looking. So it was like cool, like none of the clients are touching boats anymore, right? Our guides are going to move them all around, like, just give them their paddle before they get in the boat, right? Like, so then the people were suddenly not a part of it. And that was a big change for us to make. It's tough for me to say exactly. I mean, I personally as well went through a development stage during that time. I mean, we're talking somewhere in my early to mid 20s probably, when I was sort of having my own identity crisis. So even though the business was reshaping and that was amazing, like I was having my own internal, like, what is it that I'm doing and why am I doing it kind of crises. So it's hard for me to say what the change looked like and kind of even afterwards, because I kind of moved away from it all right after we implemented everything.
Yeah. Do you mind if we kind of talk about that crisis kind of situation? Yeah. Because I feel like, especially in the entrepreneurial space, there is always going to be a moment of extreme realization, or if we call it a crisis, right? And we start to do a lot of internal reflection on, like, what am I doing? Is this going to make me happy? And I guess long-term, does this align with who I'm trying to become? So I know a lot of people have gone through that experience. We've all asked ourselves that question. So what was Freeman's experience like in kind of going through that? Can you kind of, take us on a trip?
Yeah, for sure. The biggest thing that initiated it for me was I had always been the guy that was like, I was full on, man. I was like, not to toot my own horn, but like I was one of the best. Like people would request me to have them as their guide, right? And I was fun and I was full energy. And I, had this way of being. And what I noticed was I began to be a bit more kind of self-reflective of it. No idea where the self-reflection came from. But I do remember suddenly being like, I'm just acting this now. I'm not doing it because I want to do it. I'm doing it because it's a role and I'm playing the role. And when I made that connection in my brain, I was like, oh, I'm not being who I am anymore. Now I'm just playing the role of the raft guide who's great and fun. And I was still doing that well. I was playing that role really, really well. People were still loving the trips and stuff like that. But I would go home at the end of the day and not have that level of passion that I used to anymore. And I wouldn't be, I was like, I don't really want to have to get up and I don't want to go rafting tomorrow, which sounds wild to say because it's like supposed to be this dream job. I'm out there. I'm in the water and I'm in the rapids all day. But and then I had this realization that it was like, I am losing the passion for a sport I enjoy because it's just a job for me right now. And that was for me a big wake up to be like, I'm going to lose my enjoyment of this activity if I don't change something.
And you're how old at this point in time?
This is between the ages of 23 and 25 probably.
Okay. So we're still like in the middle of it, right? All the energy in the world, but we have to be passionate about the things we want. So here's my question for you. When you start having these moments of, I guess, that reflection on kind of like you're not in alignment with as happy as you used to be, do you talk to yourself? Do you talk to your girlfriend? Do you talk to other people around you? Like, who do you naturally go to first, or what was your experience like?
So thankfully at the time I had and still have a very supportive partner. And that was a big mover in that space. There was certainly a time where I spent a lot of time in my own head about it as well, where I was, and I'm not going to say that I immediately was like, oh, cool. Like I'm not enjoying the passion for this anymore. I'm going to go do this other thing. Like there was a period there where I was just kind of lost. And I was like, I know that I'm not enjoying what I'm doing and I have no idea what I'm supposed to do now. Because when you grow up doing something like that, I was 5 or 6 when they started the company. That's all I'd ever known. So like you're talking about shedding a whole identity at that point in time, right? Like that's what people knew me as. Oh, Freeman's the guy he's the white water rafting person, right? People still kind of know me as that. So it was tough to like shed that level of identity. And I'm really grateful that I had a supportive partner to help me through that.
Yeah, I think that's fundamental. I mean, having somebody else that's, close enough to you that you have a relationship with, who you can be vulnerable with, is incredibly important. So when I've been through an identity crisis or an identity molting in my life as well. So athlete my entire life, played all the sports, played baseball in college, and then stopped playing baseball. And, that transformation of going from who I was to who I'm becoming was incredibly rocky for me. And it took a lot of experimenting, but more importantly, a lot of getting to dead end roads and realizing like this isn't for me. So when I stopped playing baseball, it was 2011. 2012, I moved here to Las Vegas, where I'm located now. And let me tell you, the adjustment from Conway, South Carolina, just outside Myrtle Beach, to Las Vegas in 2012, before the days of Uber, I'll be honest, I made a lot of bad decisions, right? Going to people's houses and partying and participating in all the stuff and going to the clubs and blah, blah, blah. And at the end of the day, I started realizing that a lot of these roads that I've been going down were fun for a time, but they still weren't in alignment with who I wanted to become someday. And so at some point in time, I had to make the tough decision of like, okay, either I can continue to do this and become a version of myself that I don't like, or I can start trying to reprogram myself. And that's when those positivity days kind of kicked in. It was out of desperation. And I don't know if, and this is going to be me being overly vulnerable for the audience today, but it's like the positive person that you see in front of you was not a choice that was just like, ooh, I'm going to turn 10 degrees left and just be a little bit more positive. It was like there was tough times of real darkness, and I had to pull myself out of that space. And I'm glad that I did, but I would love to hear a little bit more about kind of, you know, your discovery process. What type of things did you try? What were you getting into? What moments were you like, okay, this is a dead end for me. I got to turn around. What was that kind of like?
Yeah, I feel quite grateful that I was never, at least not for like, you know, years, was I ever kind of down a road in that sense. Because the way that it worked for me, and I think this is very unique in the fact that my whitewater rafting was seasonal, which means that every September would come and I'm like, okay, what, after I'm done from school, what do I do now? And living in rural Alberta, Canada, there was an abundance, especially back then, there was abundance of work in the oil and gas industry. And that's how I ended up going there. And I remember the first time I was 19 or 20, the first time I got a job working in this oil and gas industry, and the boss, I'm always been a parent with people. I'm super authentic and I hate to lie. So I told them straight up, I was like, hey, I'm here for the winter, but you know, come May, I'm going back rafting again. And he was like, yeah, cool, sure, whatever, right?
Yeah, sure, kid.
Yeah, sure, kid, right? Yeah. And he's like, man, the minute that, I remember him saying this, he's like, oh, the minute that Freeman gets a taste of this oil field money, we're going to have him forever.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, you're not. Because thankfully, I grew up and I had parents that enforced in me that it wasn't about necessarily the money. Now, that's a limiting belief that I have now that I'm working through, but that's another conversation. But for me, it was never about that. I was happy to kind of have money and then lose it, and then have money and then lose it. And it happened to me like over and over through these seasons. But in the winter months, working in the oil and gas in the oil and gas industry definitely led me to some of those like dark moments, right? Where it's like, is this kind of all it is? Like, if I stop rafting, is this my other option that I'm just gonna like? And I'm looking at the people around me who are, scary. Again, like I said, you know, miserable, and they've got unhappy family lives, and they're drinking too much, and they're smoking all the time, and like, I'm like, this is not like, I don't want that life either, and I don't like. So then when I had that identity crisis where I was like, cool, I don't want to do this anymore, but I don't want to do that either because I don't love how that looks. Yeah, it was a super tough place to be like, how do I move forward here? Because in the oil and gas industry, I had, you know, I suffer from, and I'm still aware of, like seasonal depression. Like I have to take vitamin D in the wintertime or like things get dark, literally and
literally.
You know, and that was something that I became aware of in that oil and gas industry. And thankfully that experience led me down that road of like, it needs to be more than just money. Because I thankfully learn really well from what other people are doing. And I saw that, right? I'm like, here's people making 6 figures and up, you know, on a yearly basis. And they are just miserable. So it's like, okay, well, making 400,000 isn't the answer. Because clearly if it was, all these people I work with in the wintertime would be happy. So then it was like, well, then what's the answer? What's the solution here? And I found myself kind of there for a while.
So what you're describing is what Keenan had an experience, and I'll call it the Dion moment. So I was working one summer, and I was having a very similar experience to you. This summer job that I had was moving office furniture around the Las Vegas Valley. And it wasn't cold, but it was also 114 degrees. So it was tough work, moving cubicles and desks and all that kind of stuff.
Just sweating buckets.
Sweating buckets, exactly. And I was a little bit, I'll just call it fluffier at this point in time. So,
I was there. I've been there. I've been there.
So maybe it was just a lubricant to realize kind of, why I wasn't happy. But more importantly, one day after work, I had a conversation with this guy, Dion, right? He walks up to me and we just get our checks on a Friday, and I'm pumped because I just got a check, and he looks at my check and he's like, "Oh yeah, man, you're not making enough money yet, but don't worry. Next summer, after you've been here for a year, you're going to be eligible to get more money, and then things are going to get a lot better." And in that moment, I kind of had like a That's So Raven experience where it's like I just like kind of flashed and saw the future of like Keenan standing next to a 45-year-old Dion as a 23-year-old kid hanging out in the casinos or, kicking it in the warehouse. And in that moment, I was like, I can't do this. And so it sounds like you had a very similar experience when you were kind of hanging around with everybody. And it's like, dude, if these guys are making this type of bread and they're still not happy, obviously there's something wrong. And I don't think I can see myself there. Is that what happened with you?
100%. Yeah. And it was tough. And I think this is part of what led me down to like understanding there's more to this than just, deciding to be one way or the other, because in the summer times, at least, I was generally happier, right? Mainly because I was outside. I was being active, right? And at some point in time, I was doing what I loved, right? On the other side, when I was in the wintertime, I was just working for money, right? It was dark. I was still active, so that was decent, not nearly as much as I was, but that's where it would slip, right? And I could, like, if there was a scale, the summers it would go up and I'd feel great, and in the wintertime it would dip down again. And then the scary thing happened where suddenly the summer times the scale's not going up anymore, because now I've lost, right? I'm still outside. I'm still in the sunshine. I'm still being active. But now my scale's not going up anymore because I'm losing the passion.
Yeah.
So then that's where you begin to have that crisis of like, okay, like, hold on. I'm not happy here. I'm not happy there. And the things that I thought were making me happy in the summertime, which was being outdoors and being exercised, aren't doing it enough anymore. So like how do I fix this key ingredient?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people start looking towards activities, we'll call it that, areas of like kind of instantaneous gratification where it's like doing the drugs, smoking, drinking, right? Those moments almost, or those activities kind of give us a moment of escape from that sense of, realization. I think that sense of realization is incredibly important to not run from, you know what I mean? And it seems like one of the statements that you made a little bit ago was like, I'm very observant. I would consider myself somebody who's an observer. So it's like I realize and recognize when people aren't happy, or the things they're talking about, the behavior that they're participating in, but they don't take action to actually get change. And I just think it's so important to, they said a stupid man learns from other people's lessons. A wise man learns from everybody else's experiences in general, if they're good or bad. You know what I mean? And so like being somebody who's an observer, you're realizing that, first of all, the money's not going to get you there. Second of all, you're not as happy. Third of all, you don't want to participate in these activities like doing drugs and drinking and smoking and blah, blah, blah. I think that's incredibly powerful to kind of hold yourself. And let's be a little bit of appreciative for a younger version of Freeman for kind of, having the fortitude and bravery to kind of stand up in that moment to himself, because I don't know where you would be at today. Do you ever think about what would life be like if you would have gone down that other path?
Yeah, and I don't have to think very hard, honestly, if I'm being truthful. Like, it's right there. Like, it's not far away. I know we've talked in the past about, very briefly anyways, that I had, and I'll fully admit, I had a full-on addiction to playing video games.
Okay.
And I remember, it's interesting, and this sparked in my brain when you said people feel this need to go and like get that somewhere else. Right. So I'm like, cool, I've lost my passion in this job that I'm doing. I'm not finding it over there in this other job. And I remember saying, and I still catch myself doing this, where I'm like, I just need to win. I just need to win, And like, that was literally the video gaming thing, where it was like, I just need to win. I need to win. I'll feel better if I win this next game. I'll feel better if I win this next game. And then you lose and you fall into that slump, right? And like, video games are designed, especially a lot of like online ones, are designed to kind of hit like a 48% win percentage. That's what they're aiming for anyways, because it keeps you just about there, right? And it's a bit of dirty psychology because they're keeping you addicted to that. I just need to win. I just need one. I just need one win, right? And you get that one win, and of course it's not enough. You need another one, right? And I can easily look at that. And I spent too many years playing too many hours of too many video games. And so, like, in that sense, that's right there. Like, there's a thin sheet between me and the person spending the same time in this exact room, 6-8 hours a day playing a video game, working a dead end job just so I can make money, so I can go home and play my video game. And again, back to that support of my wife, is like, she kind of made me aware that, like, hey, like, you're spending a lot of time like playing these video games. Like, how important am I in this relationship? Which is a good wake up call. But I mean, honestly, like, it still took me until probably a few years ago to shed that level of, like, I would say even, I would call it a level of, need for the video game.
Yeah.
It took me a long time to shed that, for sure.
I mean, there's a couple of things that, it's tough, because sometimes we naturally, as people, and this is something I think about from a social media perspective, we are naturally kind of training ourselves all the time, right? If we're talking about social media, we're hopping on social media all the time, looking for that next 48, 51%, 52%, whatever it is, kind of win. If it's likes, it's comments, whatever. Even when we play video games, you know what I mean? Like, at first, it feels like a sense of escapism. And we kind of go into this world and we get that feeling that we're not seeing from the other areas in our life. But eventually, that feeling of escapism isn't as gratifying. It doesn't feel as good. It doesn't give us that release of dopamine. And so we're always chasing, some of those early experiences. And I've really recognized that. And, part of my maturation process has been trying to figure out what type of activities can I train myself well that are going to kind of help me reverse engineer my version of success that I'm chasing. And often it's not the video game stuff. It's not Instagram, and I'm still having a tough time with that. It's not the other activities as well that kind of fill that void. Sitting with some of those tough moments has been something that I've realized is necessary, but it's still, no matter how much you train yourself, is still a difficult task to kind of go through. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, because it's right there, right? The phone is right there. You could pick it up. Like, if I'm being fully transparent, it's like, I know that I could download that game right now.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and for those people out there who can play video games on a sheerly, fun basis and a social level, like, man, I wish I could, but I that's not me. And I have to essentially, like, pretty much like somebody who's addicted to alcohol, and it seems wild that it's almost that level, like, I almost feel like an imposter to say that that's the level that it's at, but it's like, it's right. It's always right there. Right. And especially, it's interesting, like you said it like this, it's like, when you are struggling with something, that's when your brain looks for it.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, I just need that win.
Yeah.
That's all I need. Like, I'll get that win and I'll get out. It's like, no, you won't though, right? Like, and I had to learn the hard way, because I would delete the program. I'm like, no, like, I got to get my shit together. Spending too much time on this, I'll delete it. And then it was like, I just need the one.
Yeah.
Win. I'll go in.
And it's tough because it's like that voice is
tough,
always going to be there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And like, I have to recognize, I've been having this conversation with myself over the last couple of weeks recently. It's like, when I want to be distracted, I'm realizing that, like, the lower version of myself, that guy who's always hanging out in the background and being like, dude, come over here and just, like, hang out. You know what I mean? He's very powerful when I give him the attention. Man. Yeah, exactly. You know what I mean? But like, sometimes I've had victories where it's like, no, I'm not going to go do those things. Right. Now, that could be whatever for you. That could be, playing video games. That could be, smoking. That can be just a whole bunch of different things that we know aren't truly in line with what we want. And sometimes that little voice in the back of your head is so persuasive, but when you do defeat it, it feels so good. You know what I mean? And like, the farther and farther I get away from those things, the better and better I feel about myself for being true to who I truly am. You know what I mean? I'm not sure if that's similar to your video game experience, because I'm sure you get that itch to hop on the sticks.
Dude, every time. The fact that we're talking about it right now, it gives me the itch, right? But I think for myself anyways, and for people listening, like, if this is something you struggle with and you want to be like, cool, like, I feel like I understand these guys and I'm in the same position, like, how do I get out of here? You've really got to narrow down to, like, why you want to change. It's not good enough to just say, I need to stop playing video games. I want to stop drinking alcohol. I'm going to. You need to know why you're going to. And for myself, after a lot of self-reflection and looking at things, it was like, I want to nay, I need to build a better, like, I can't build the life I want my family to have playing video games 6 hours a day. It's not going to happen. So I want to build this certain style of life for my family. Like, what is it going to take to do that? And then you continually remind yourself of that. You've got to have that strong why, and it's got to be something that you continually drive towards. It stops you from doing that thing that's right behind the sheet.
Yep.
And like, so for me, it really is providing a certain lifestyle to my family. It's helping people. Again, like, I have way more impact now as a stress management coach than I ever would playing 6 hours of video games a day. And when you take the why, and it's no longer about even yourself, but about others, that really begins to kind of unlock the ability to push past all that shit that you know you shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, and sometimes giving ourselves the responsibility to care for others, I think, is a big motivator. I was having a conversation with my sister the other day, and she was like, you know what, Keenan, it's just like interesting. I've realized something about myself, that I'm not very motivated when it comes to doing things for me. Mm-hmm. But I am motivated when it comes to doing things for Jason, her fiance, right? She's like, so I think about, he's going to be retiring in a couple years, and I don't want him to work as hard as he's working right now. And it's like, when I have that conversation with myself, I'm much more motivated to go out and make stuff happen, rather than being like, I'm just going to do this for me. And so I think it's incredibly powerful that you've given yourself the authority to take responsibility for others, and how that has almost reverse engineered your need to change, because you're in true realization of the alignment of the man who you're becoming. And, like me and you have had other conversations about, like, the topic or the book Atomic Habits, right? And he talks about, if you truly want change, you have to change who you are, or who you're becoming, your identity. And when I kind of have those moments of weakness, one of the most powerful things that I do for myself is calling action back towards, Keenan, who are you becoming? Are you going to be the version of yourself who you want to be if you're going to be doing these activities? And often the answer is no. And it's like, okay, well, future version of Keenan wouldn't do those things, so why should the current version of my lesser self pull me back down and kind of erode all this progress that I've been making? And that's just a powerful statement. And like, I don't think enough people do that, to realize that you have so much more responsibility to not only yourself, but to the future version of you, plus the people who you're trying to build a lifestyle with, especially as a man.
Yeah, there's a really powerful practice that goes along with that I believe I got from Lewis Howes, and it's, you have essentially a photo of your younger self, and then a blank photo, and that photo is the future self, right? And having these two photos lets you be, okay, what do I do today that makes the younger version of me proud of who I've become? And what do I do today to make sure that I'm living the best version of me, so that the future self me has the best things that they can do to become even more, right? Like, and it's, so as much as we say, like, be in the present and don't pay attention to the past and don't look at the future, it's like, you have to a little bit, I think, in order to, if you want to achieve kind of any level of anything, you have to be willing to learn from your past and set goals for your future. And having weird little visual keys, like a picture of a younger self and a blank photograph, I think are really powerful ways to do it. That with visual triggers.
I think it's important as well. And it is, a lot of people do talk about, just be in the present moment. I think there's value in that. But I just want to be very transparent for all the people who are listening out here. As a man, a lot of my motivation comes for the future version of me being able to provide for the people who I want to. You know what I mean? And it's like, I cannot consistently live in the moment without having a direction that I'm forging towards as a man, to be able to provide the lifestyle that I want for my future kids and the future family that I will have. And at some point in time, I think we stop being little kids and we start having to realize that we're more so responsible for providing for a family and a future that's going to be kind of built on our foundation. And I want to use that as a transition, because today we are a few days away from you, at the time of recording, kind of expanding your family. You know what I mean? So it's like this kind of stuff kind of sitting a little bit heavier on you these days, as you kind of have a little one that's just right around the corner.
I wouldn't say it's sitting heavier. And the only reason I say that is because about maybe just under a year ago or so, when I began to get really clear about why I'm doing what I'm doing and why I want to make these changes, like, even then I was like, no, it's like, to your point, it's to help provide for the family that I'm going to have. So that was already there. You know, obviously my wife being literally about to give a baby certainly adds maybe urgency to it. And that's something else that I'm certainly struggling with. I know we've talked a lot about this, about the whole like urgency game, right? And the immediate gratification and how long is our runway. So that's been a really, again, to be brutally honest, hard internal struggle of myself right now. But as for like being more aware of this is something that I have to, you know, support and, you know, it's going to literally depend on me. I kind of put that stuff into my brain a while ago. I would say it's kind of crystallized maybe in the recent months, but it was always part of it. It was always part of that initial change.
Yeah. And I think I've seen maybe, you know, from the outside looking in, kind of that realization starting to manifest itself in the way that you're, the way that you're moving, you know what I'm saying? Because like, I want to take this as an opportunity to kind of transition. So we listened to your young life chapter entrepreneurial experience. And I think, to be transparent from the way that I sit in history, I think people that have an entrepreneurial example when they're younger are more likely to pursue that. And 100%. So you've recently made the pivot into being, you know, a stress management coach and taking on your own entrepreneurial new season in your life and what that represents. And so let's kind of talk about, you know, the that sense of urgency that we're talking about. So one of the topics for today that I talked about, or that I wanted to talk about, was aggressive patience. And that in itself is kind of a sum up of that sense of urgency. Like, you know, we need to make things happen. We need to be attacking, but we also have to be patient for things to happen. And I think with your background as being somebody who can help people deal with stress, maybe you can give the audience an experience or a little bit of, you know, real life experience about kind of how you have this sense of urgency pushing behind you. It's creating stress in your entrepreneurial journey and kind of how you're dealing with that.
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, it's definitely in the last, I would say 6 months, probably, it's been a lot more of kind of eating what's on my own menu, right? It's like, okay, I have to start living these things and I got to live them really hard, because it seems wild if I were to look at what I'm doing from an outward perspective, right? It seems a little bit crazy. You're like, you're about to have a kid, you're starting this new thing. Like, what are you doing? Like, how are you going to make all this work? And it's like, I know that I'm going to make it work. I'm going to do I know I have the skills, I have the abilities, and I've put the practice in to push through this level of intensity that I know I'm going to have in the next, you know, few months for sure. So like that would be the biggest thing, is like, I've done the mental prep for it. I know what's coming, and it's incredibly ambitious. There's no doubt about that. And in the most recent months, I've had to lean into those things a lot more. I've had to be far more aware of, I'm big on the bookends of my day. So I've had to be far more aware of what those bookends look like. Yeah. And I know, because when I slip off of them, things start to kind of look a little shitty. And then I'm like, okay, wait, I gotta get these back into order again. So that would be a big thing, is just pay attention to those bookends of the day. Those are the parts that you can control. And I've had to become a lot more sensitive to what's going on in those, to make sure that I can show up to be as optimal as I possibly can in that middle chunk of the day. Because I'm trying to start a new business, rebrand, run a new podcast, work a full-time job, and support a pregnant partner. It's a lot, right? But it's like, when I get the bookends right, I can do it. If I slip on the bookends, I lose the ability to do it in the middle.
So when we're saying bookends, we're referring to these boundaries that you've established for yourself. Is that what that means, or what does bookends mean?
Yeah. So for me, it's boundaries, but it's also to lean into the metaphor a little harder. It's like, what am I leaning on at the end and the start of each day, right? So It's things like having that consistent sleep schedule, in and out of bed. It's having the workout and the hydration first thing in the morning, delaying the coffee so that, you know, I get the most benefit out of the rest of the day as well. And then at the end of the day, it's like, you know, turning off my computer at a certain time, which is really tough when you're driving hard, right? And I'm not going to pretend to be perfect, right? I'm supposed to stop working at 8. It's probably 8:45 or 9 some nights. It's later some nights too. But again, when I work later, the next day is a bit of a mess. So like having those important bits. So at the beginning, it's structure. And at the end, it's structure and boundary, where it's like, cool, I'm done with work. I'm doing, you know, the last 2 hours is spent with with my significant other, and preferably maybe a bit of TV time and then a bit of reading before the end of my day as well. And it's really important to keep those boundaries and those structures in place when you're driving hard, even though that's when it's really, really, really hard.
And I think we all have those experiences where it's like, I just want to work harder, longer, farther. And it's like, sometimes, when I heard you saying this, it's like, I love having these conversations because you and I both have enough life experience to recognize when we start to get a diminishing return on our extra effort. You know what I mean? It's like, if I do not get enough sleep, at 32 years old, I realize that I'm not as efficient when it comes to making decisions. I'm not as cognitively clear. I'm not as creative. I'm not as productive. And I often get easily distracted. And so when I think about, working less but being more effective, it means being more locked in during those times. And the one thing that I want everybody who's listening to this today, if you're listening to this conversation, you're like, yeah, but I still can't find enough time in the day and I'm working as much as I can. My question for you is to be very transparent with yourself. How much time are you spending on this device? How much time are you spending distracted? I heard somebody on TikTok or Instagram the other day that was like, if you just waste 5 minutes of your day, by the time you get to the end of the year, you've wasted about 2.5 weeks of time total. And I was like, okay, that's very interesting to hear from that perspective, because I know there's been so many times during the day where it's like, I'll just be like, looking through something, and then I get distracted. Then I go down a little black hole and I look up and it's been 15 minutes. You know what I mean? And it's like, no wonder I can't achieve the things that I want to, because like I do not demonstrate the actual properties and the actual character traits of true focus. I think I am, but maybe I'm lying to myself, in that sense of sense of accountability to myself is something that I'm really trying to get better at.
Yeah, it's tough. And I won't deny the fact that it is tough. Like, we're not sitting here saying that it's easy to just not look at your phone, or it's easy to just not do these things that make you feel better in the moment, because it's not easy. And again, if it was easy, everybody would do it, and we wouldn't be having this conversation, right? It's part of the reason that we have to do these things, and part of the reason why they're hard. The thing is, as well, with that, something I have to continually remind myself of is we often will start sacrificing things because we think we get more time to then work on other stuff if we sacrifice certain things. A big one is sleep, right? It's like, well, what if I only sleep 6 hours? Well, then I gain 2 hours back. And it's like, you might gain 2 hours of time back, but what do you lose in focus? And this can be applied to, I use sleep because I think it's one of the easiest things for people to identify with, but this can be nutrition, this can be fitness, and it can even be social time and downtime for that matter. You're like, oh, I'm going to work right until I go to bed, because then, I don't, like, if you're like Freeman, he spent 2 hours, that's 2 hours you could be doing something. It's like, no, that's 2 hours I'm spending recharging. So I get that level of focus and energy back in my next day. And I know, because I've done it where I'm like, I'll just squeak it in. I'll just, I'll work a little late tonight. And I still do, like, don't get me wrong. I'm not perfect. But I know if I trip up, 1 day's okay. Even 2 days is all right. If it like goes to 3 days of missing that sleep schedule or not going to the gym, yeah, I feel it right away. I'm like, something's off. I'm not clear. I'm not focused. I want to look at my phone more now throughout the day, because I've lost my ability. I haven't given myself enough recharge to have the capacity to not do that type of thing. So it's really important.
It is. And I think it's just, I see a lot, this is separate from anything that, was on the calendar to kind of talk about today. But, I think that society in itself is always willing to prescribe the best practice for you based on somebody else's experience, right? And we see a lot today in social media where it's like, I'm going to participate in minimal effort Mondays, where it's like, I don't like working on Mondays because it gives me the scaries, I feel stressed, blah, blah, blah. And then other people are like, well, you should work harder at the beginning of the week to have quiet weekends. You know what I mean? It's like everybody is always going to have a prescription for how you should be balancing your own levels of stress. But until you actually kind of have the fortitude and you take responsibility enough to audit what makes you the optimal version of you, I don't think you can really prescribe to anybody's answer. No cold plunge, no sauna, no sleeping with a mask or or tape over your mouth, or, doing infrared light or different stuff is going to work unless you truly know who you are. And that's why I kind of get excited, because it sounds like you've been experimenting and now you've gotten to the point where it's like, I've tried all that stuff, but that just doesn't work for me. And I think that sense of accountability and authenticity to yourself is super important, especially in this world of entrepreneurial jargon and different stuff. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I mean, people can look at it like that's such a powerful point, and something that I try to harp on with my clients as well. It's one of the reasons that my program is a customizable program, and they're the reason I built it that way when I first built it. It's if there was a silver bullet that I could tell everybody right now, right here on this podcast, if I could tell everybody listening, start doing this one thing, life's going to be great. Like I wouldn't keep that to myself, but that's not how it works. We're all individual and we all have the own thing that works for us. Like entrepreneurship, and if you ask any really highly successful entrepreneur, who's been doing it their entire lives, there is a entire flaming pile of wreck behind them of things they tried to do. And it's the same thing with your self-development and what works for you on a daily basis. Like you got to try those things, find what works, give it a shot. Drive with what is intriguing you at that point in time. If you're like, man, this Wim Hof guy's cool, dig into that for a while. Do some Wim Hof breathing. Try some cold plunges, right? If that's not working for you and like, oh no, like it kills me every morning and it adds friction in my life, stop doing it because you're not going to anyways, right? Like you have to do things that you're driven to do because it's not about the thing you're doing. It's about the consistency that you do it.
I mean, that's just a mic drop in itself. It's true. I mean, like at the same time, it's like everybody has a version of what is going to work. And at the same time, everybody has a version of what is not going to work. Do you know what I mean? It's like, and at the end of the day, if you're not happy doing what you're doing, you're never going to be able to survive anyway. I want to spend the last couple minutes here kind of talking about stress and stress management. And so, I recognize that you are proficient at articulating what stress is to so many different people. But let's talk about the fact that stress is represented by so many different things. And depending on what type of industry you're in, depending on what type of season you're in or what point you're in your life, I think stress kind of is represented by multiple different things. So when people come to you and they say, I'm stressed, what is part of the process in being like, let's identify and actually recognize what stress means to you and why is that important?
So it's hugely important. And this, harkens back to what I was doing as a younger kid. Stress is a response our body has. Bottom line, that's all stress is. It's not good, it's not bad. It's simply something our body does in reaction to our environment. How we deem to interpret that stress is really, really important because, for example, they did this amazing study where it's people who think that their stress is causing them harm actually have constricted blood vessels. That's why their heart rate increases. People who deem their stress as being beneficial to them have been shown to have expanded blood vessels to drive oxygenated blood to the muscles to get things running. And it actually increases heart health as well. So the first thing is like, let's understand what stress is.
Hold on. So what you're telling me here is if we identify stress as being something positive, it can be beneficial to the body.
100%.
If we identify stress as being something detrimental, it can be harming to the body.
100%.
Wow.
Yeah. So oxytocin, which we all know is like the love chemical, is actually a stress response from the body. So and it actually has been proven to actually help heart health.
Wow.
So oxytocin, and I'm going to get some things wrong here, but feel free to go Google this, whoever's listening. It binds to, essentially the neurons in your heart and can actually make your heart healthier. The problem that occurs is when we start dealing with what we call chronic stress or long-term stress, that's when we start seeing things like, depression, anxiety, burnout. That's a negative level of stress. So it's like, let's first understand the difference between a good and a bad stress, the response in our bodies. Let's change that perspective in our brain. And then let's begin to look at what happens when we fall into the rabbit hole of chronic stress or burnout or depression.
Okay. I think that's incredibly powerful. I had a friend, Katie Friedlander, and a couple of years ago, I want to say it was like 2013, and she said something incredibly proficient to me. She said, or profound. She said, Keenan, feeling excited and feeling nervous are the exact same thing to your body, but your brain is telling you which one is which. And I was like, oh, wow. Because I was getting ready to like go talk to somebody or talk to a group of people. And I was like, yeah, I'm feeling nervous. And she was like, nervous and excited are the same thing. Tell yourself that you're excited and your body is feeling that no matter what. So tell it that you're feeling excited. And ever since that experience, whenever I've come into a stressful situation, I'm like, this is my body getting me ready for something that's awesome. You know what I mean? It's not the nerves that are creeping in, but it's the excitement and that feeling of stress that is the same, but I'm just painting it in a different coat of a color.
Mm-hmm. There's an easy way to remember this. There's an amazing neuroscientist, Dr. Elise something or other. I can't remember her last name off the top of my head right now. This is her concept, so I don't want to say it's my own. But she's like, be the lion, not the gazelle. Both of those things are under a stress at that point in time. Right? If a lion is chasing a gazelle, the gazelle is stressed because it's nervous, it's scared. The lion is excited and energized. It's the exact same response in your body. So be the lion, not the gazelle. And that's an easy way to just remind yourself of stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important, but it comes back down to that ability to kind of, audit how we feel in the moment and actually narrate what we're feeling to our body. Because we're just reacting at a cellular level, from an endorphins, a hormone level, body of fluid and tissue, you know what I mean? And being able to kind of architect and tell it what it's feeling in that moment is so powerful. And I love that analogy of being the lion rather than the gazelle. I think that's super powerful. This has been an incredible conversation today, Freeman. I can't thank you enough for kind of hopping on and, sharing some of your wisdom. Why don't you give everybody an understanding of kind of how we can find more about your stress management coaching practice, how we can get in touch with you, but also give a call to action about your socials as well, because you continue to put out fire. And I think everybody could benefit from getting, a dose of positivity and groundedness that you serve up every day.
Yeah, thank you, Keenan. I appreciate it. I appreciate this conversation. It's always such a pleasure. Like I said, chatting with you at the beginning here, I said it's so great. It really expands upon what my understandings are of things that are going on in the world. So thank you so much for that. For those of you who are looking to kind of find out more information on this, everything I do is under my name. So Freeman Beals. So on LinkedIn, Freeman Beals, Instagram at Freeman Beals. My website is freemanbeals.com. I make it really easy for everybody to find what I'm doing and where I'm doing it. So go on there, check that kind of stuff out. I'm always giving a ton of free information to people. I'm very open with how I do what I do, why I do what I do, and I don't hold that stuff back. Even if you're like, hey, if you just want to message me on any one of those platforms and be like, hey, I'm struggling with X, Y, and Z thing, what should I do? Like, do that. 100%. I will try my best to give you a response that may be useful to you. If you want more information too as well, I have my own podcast, From Stress to Success, where I sit down with CEOs, entrepreneurs, and kind of thought leaders, and kind of understand this stuff at a more deeper level as well. So if this has intrigued you, go check that out as well. I highly recommend it.
Well, thank you so much, guys. And, Freeman, it's been an absolute pleasure hosting you. And I can't, thank you so much for, willingness to contribute to the Hart Hustle Podcast and everything that we talk about. Today, you've definitely kind of given us a better understanding for where the heart of Freeman Beals comes from, but also that background of hustle and why you're so driven to be so successful, so positive, and so uplifting to the people around you. Guys, it's been an amazing episode. If there's anything that we missed today or any topics that you think we should be talking about on the podcast, drop them down in the comments, and we'll try and include those in a future episode. But thanks so much, guys. Really appreciate it. Take it easy.
Thanks, everyone.
Sick. Thanks,